Many of you may be familiar with Margie Caust. She has worked in state government before. She's currently working as a consultant in Adelaide, and she is co-author of the book with Charles on the creative bureaucracy. So if you could please join me in welcoming Margie to come and talk about the survey. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, for introducing me. Many of you might be aware that over the last couple of weeks we have conducted a survey about the creative bureaucracy, and we were interested in a way this replicates some work we did in 2014, where we did a report, a pilot study on the creative bureaucracy in South Australia. So at that time we did a survey of about 50 people, and we thought it might be interesting to repeat some of the questions and then ask some other questions and take a bit of a pulse on how people were thinking about issues of creativity and government in South Australia. So the results of those surveys sort of essentially came in over the last few weeks, concluded on the weekend, and what's been incredibly interesting is it's got a really rich range of information with a lot of comments. People have really given thought to how they want to give us some very useful information about how these issues are travelling in South Australia. As a result, I have not had the time to do a forensic analysis. So what you're getting today is very much the raw headline information that's come from that. And not all the topics either, because there were 28 questions and we don't have time to go through each of them. So I thought I'd just pick out the things that I think are quite interesting and might help the conversation today. So as a bit of background, one of the reasons we're doing this is to help conceive of potentially of a program. If we were going to do a program around the creative bureaucracy in South Australia over, say, the next 12 months, what would that involve? What could that look like? So for us, this workshop today is a very purposeful session. We're very interested in getting your assistance in shaping what that could look like and how that might add value to your experience working. Well, I don't know if everybody here works in government in some level, but if you do, then it would be very helpful to have that. As I said, I'm going to do the headline results. This is really we got about 219 responses, and you might find this interesting. 93% over 35, 61% have worked in government for 10 years or more, 84% were state government employees, 10% local government, and 45% had worked in their job for 1 to 5 years, so this might be interesting. But if we just jump into it, how do you rate your own creativity? We were asked this question: low, I don't rate myself as creative; medium, I get energy from using my imagination; or high, being creative is very core to my identity. And as you can see, on the whole, people rate themselves as medium, high in this area. Then how relevant is creativity to state? You can see that 87% say it's very high or very high. So that's quite stark. How important is creative thinking in the public sector? 88% say high or very high. So we're getting a message that people who work in government think this is an important issue. How important is being creative to you? Again, 88% say high or very high, but you can see that it skews into very high. But when you come down to what people say their creative potential is at work, it's about 58% say that it's high or very high. So there's potentially a slight mismatch between how important it is and how people feel that they are able to contribute. 84% when asked, could you contribute more creatively, say they could. I mean, that again is quite a stark answer. And one of the questions that we explored last time, and one of essentially Charles used to explore this a bit in the Creative City Index work as well, which is ask people how much do you feel you are able to contribute at the moment, and where is the gap in terms of the level of your contribution. So what's incredibly interesting is, regardless of how and where we've asked that question, it comes out that people say 60 to 65% of their essentially the potential is only about 60 to 65% engaged. They have more that they could be bringing if the circumstances were right, if the conditions allowed them to do that. And this has been very much confirmed by this search. So it's about 61% feel of the person is engaged in work. Does that make sense? Am I being clear? It's when you start to kind of then try and draw the connection between what people think is important for the future of the state. We've asked a few questions about this, and I haven't reproduced all of them. But one of the questions we tried to reproduce to some extent was one that had been asked by IBM many years ago about what's the most important capability required for leaders in the future. We've augmented that question somewhat, but the results, we only gave people one option, so this is not like choosing 1 to 5. So from their one choice, most people chose either strategic thinking or managing complexity. Not that many chose creativity. That came out top in the IBM survey, like it's less than 10% here. But I think if you start to try and unpick this issue of complexity and strategic thinking, you can see that there's an implied requirement for creativity that underpins that, because how else are we going to be starting to manage these issues? Yet there is a bit of a mismatch, because even though strategic thinking is rated very high by people, only 24% say they are high or very highly engaged in contributing to the vision of their organisation. So it gets the sense that people feel a bit disconnected from how their organisation is shaping its priorities. Testing new ideas, we also would assume that if you're dealing with complexity, the answers are never going to be clear. You're going to have to be iterating, experimenting to respond to complex issues. But only 16% say high, very high, in terms of that their organisation is engaged in experimenting. It's just like, we had a kind of few interesting questions, but as a fun place to work, it's not too bad really. It's 28% high or very high. It'd be interesting to hear how each of you think of that issue. The public values what I do. It's a mixed picture here, whether people feel that the public either maybe know what they do or values what they do. To be creative, we think that people have to have a certain sense of safety. It's not like you want to be too safe. You need to have also challenges and discomfort as well. But without a certain base level of safety, it's hard for people to take risks. And here we've got that 27% high or very high feel that their organisation is a safe place to work. I love what I do. It's quite high, Actually, people that often work in the public sector are attracted because of the relationship to the values that they have. And it's really quite heartening to see that people do essentially mostly give an impression that they love what they do. Also, that people are really keen to be adding more value, to find opportunities. I mean, this is super high. 60% very high, 93% high, very high. Interesting, people say they're really confident that they know how to do their job. Interesting point for discussion, because sometimes we think we know exactly what our job is around. Sometimes we may be right or wrong, but this is an interesting, very highly skewed. But also that people very much like joining the dots. And, when we're talking about entrepreneurs, we're talking about people that are very keen to see patterns, to connect things that are not necessarily connected, and find ways of bringing more value to these connections. So, this is quite, I find this interesting. Then there was a question of, well, if people are people expressing themselves creatively outside of their work? Is this a sign that they're not necessarily getting the opportunities in work and they're finding that, or actually that anyway, we are always looking for ways to add energy to our lives and to express ourselves? Around about 40% say that they're developing their own artistic project. 24% say, the words are cut off, contributing to a social enterprise. More than 71% say they're involved in some sort of form of volunteering. Nearly a quarter are developing a business idea or being an activist. 12% are doing some sort of performing activity outside of work. This is, I find this interesting. When we asked how appealing these activities were for people, we got a mixed picture. When you go out in the world, you think that the most exciting thing to do might be to be an entrepreneur, to be a freelancer, to be out there creating your own business or own project. This is about less than 30%, I think, of freelancing. Nearly 70% are wanting to take some time out, but that actually is a sign that people maybe feel like they want to refresh themselves, inspire themselves, find new ways of building up their energy, I guess, as well. 92% want to work for a values-driven organisation. Not as many as I was thinking are inspired to move interstate or overseas. I thought there's always the allure of another place, but actually that didn't rate really high. When we asked people how they describe themselves, in a way I was inspired by a previous survey that had been done about entrepreneurs, where a very high proportion, that Kristen Alford actually did, and I think she must be elsewhere, that a very high number of people describe themselves as troublemakers in that survey. Excuse me. So I was interested in whether that was a characteristic that people might also associate with, the sorts of people that might do this survey might also associate with themselves. But in fact, that's not true. A relatively small amount of people describe themselves as mavericks or troublemakers. But we know that organisations that are able to encompass and work with people that are mavericks and work quite differently to other people are more interesting. They're more likely to bring a kind of more interesting kind of range of perspectives and content together. And the risk, having worked in government, I know that there was always a tendency to try and homogenise. In my experience, there was a certain level of sameness to the types of people that were brought in, and that the people that stood out were often, it was harder for them to survive in the organisation. So it's just an interesting challenge that we have in government organisations. But also to see that 83% of people describe themselves as adaptable and 49% as harmonisers. The implications of that are both positive and also possibly around kind of going with the flow. So it's not that that's not positive, but there's also a thing that harmonisers are going to build bridges, but also they might be trying to avoid conflict. Adaptable people are able to deal with fast-changing conditions, but they also might be more interested in going with the flow than changing things. So just another point for us to think about. But 67% like to see themselves as connectors. And when we see the challenges of government around the silos and the separateness of thinking, the fact that we've got so many people at least starting to see this role as being important is heartening. We've got a huge amount of qualitative information here where people are providing comments, as I said before. So I just tried to pull out some of the points, some of the words that were commonly used when we asked what prevents creative thinking. And as you can see, it's probably not a huge surprise that these things of hierarchies, egos, unions is interestingly came up, silo thinking, fear. We asked a question about whether the workplace people felt afraid or there was fear in the workplace. Was that a high quality? It didn't come up, as far as I recall, as a particularly high-rated quality, but that when you go through the comments, you can see a lot of the comments use the word fear, fear of this, fear of risk-taking, fear of getting things wrong, fear of... And so while people don't see the workplace necessarily as being a fearful place, there is a lot of fear that people mention in that. This is just some of the comments that I pulled out. That there's a lot, but I just pulled out a few that I thought were interesting. This is quite stark, and I quite liked it. This person who says, "I take risks, but I don't admit to them." When I did a whole series of surveys, interviews back in 2014, the thing that it struck me most as very interesting at the time was that people that were working in areas where they felt a bit constrained and they weren't able to really express themselves were telling me how they created a space within their job that was creative, that they controlled, that they led their own mini creative project that people may not have been aware of, but they were doing it and they were leading it and doing it possibly under the radar, nobody knew about it. But it did give them space to feel like they were really expressing themselves in ways that they were not able to do across the whole range of their normal job. These are also some of the other comments. So, while in a survey like this, you tend to get a lot of people being critical and saying, well, this is what doesn't work, this doesn't work. You also get people saying, I love where I am, I want to be challenged, I love to be able to show what I could do. So it feels to me like the content that we've got from this particular survey is incredibly positive, because what we're seeing is people with a real energy to contribute, a real sense that their contribution would make a difference, and a sense that it is needed. And so what I think our challenge is how do we craft the environment and the conditions within which people are operating to help them bring forth their full potential in this work environment. So that is it for me. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Yes. There's a mic.
Thanks, Margie. How representative is the sample?
How representative is the sample?
Look.
Not very. No, sorry. What is it?
We did have a bit of a chat about this yesterday. I think the sort of people that are drawn to doing this survey are more likely to be the sort of people that find the idea interesting, and there's probably a lot of people that are not going to be drawn to do this work. So we're probably skewed in terms of people that actually find the whole idea of entrepreneurialism interesting, because they may have been people that are coming here today and interested in these ideas, or people that find the whole idea of creativity in the workplace interesting. So, that's all I can say is I think that it's probably somewhat skewed.
But I think what was interesting about the survey, because we did similar work before, and also we've done other work in other cities, and we probably interviewed, one-to-one and so on, a few hundred people, 500 or so, is that class of person, that slightly more open to very open person, probably goes in this sort of direction. It's always difficult to find the person who's completely uninterested in what one's saying. Agreed. But at least there are a lot of them who want to do something. There's a question at the back. Sorry, did you raise your hand or were you just scratching your head? Okay, that's fine.
If I can use the chairman's privilege here to ask a question. It was probably more an observation, but maybe a reflection. I was fascinated by the result on the question about, do I feel confident doing my job? And it was just extraordinarily sort of, yes, I feel really confident doing my job. I guess that raises a fundamental question of whether the public sector is actually being stretched enough, and that they actually don't. You put them in a position where they don't feel confident, they can actually learn and therefore, I guess, push boundaries and innovate and so forth.
Yeah, I take that point, and I think it felt really high. And, I'm not a great example of...
You're so modest, you would not feel that. That's your problem.
I'm not a great example because no matter what job I ever had in government, I never felt completely confident that I was kind of getting it and I knew exactly what to do. But I would have thought that when you're dealing with a complex and challenging job, actually you're having, it's not something you feel totally confident in. I don't know if people, maybe this is something that we can...
Well, I think one of the things which is true is someone who's answering the questionnaire, would they say and admit that they're not confident? So I think that when you write up the report, you'll obviously be taking that into account, that people aren't necessarily going to say, I feel really that I can't do my job. At the same time, I feel creative. We're bearing that all in mind. Yeah. So when you just show raw figures, all sounds a bit stark, and obviously we agree with you.